Welcome to another lecture in anatomy and physiology. Today's lecture is going to talk about muscle structure and function. Today we're going to talk about the basics. We will also discuss terminology. The structure of skeletal muscle will be discussed. The physiology of muscle contraction will be explained. We will also talk about how the muscles in the body are named. And then we will finish off by talking about the compartments of the limbs and their actions. Let's look at the basics here. There are over 650 muscles in the human body. Muscles only shorten. They do not elongate. They only contract. They only pull. They do not push. I'm going to reiterate this again. Muscles only shorten. They do not push. Therefore, the muscles in the body are often structured to oppose each other. For example, the biceps brachii flexes the elbow while the triceps brachii extends the elbow. So you got your biceps contracting here and your triceps is relaxed here. While the elbow flexes, that means that the biceps is contracting while the triceps is at rest. It is not that the triceps is lengthening, but it's the fact that the biceps is contracting or shortening. Functional groups of muscles. The prime mover, or the agonist, is the muscle that does most of the work in a muscle group. For example, in elbow flexion, it would be the brachialis. Synergists are muscles that pull in the same direction. They assist the prime mover. A great example would be the biceps brachii assisting in elbow flexion. Antagonists are muscles that pull in the opposite direction. They oppose the action of the agonist. The triceps brachii opposes elbow flexion because it is an extensor muscle. Fixators prevent a bone from moving, and these are muscles that stabilize the scapula during elbow flexion, like your serratus anterior or even the pectoralis minor, for example. Here's common terminology that's used to describe muscle. Every muscle has an origin, and this origin is usually in a fixed position when the muscle contracts, and the origin is usually proximal. Insertion of a muscle moves when the muscle contracts, and the insertion is usually distal. Innervation. All muscles are stimulated by nerve fibers. Many muscles are innervated by a named nerve. Like let's take, for example, the latissimus dorsi. It originates from the lower back. It inserts on the proximal humerus. It is innervated by the thoracodorsal nerve. Every muscle has a blood supply. All skeletal muscles require a blood supply. Many muscles are perfused by named vessels. So for example, the latissimus dorsi that I was discussing before, its blood supply comes from the thoracodorsal artery. Action. What the muscle does. Sometimes the name of the muscle describes its action. However, for the latissimus dorsi, its action is to adduct the humerus and to flex the shoulder. Actually, to extend the shoulder. Structure of skeletal muscle. The structure of skeletal muscle has a hierarchy that goes from simple to complex. The most basic structures are the myofilament, and the myofilaments contain thick filaments such as myosin, and thin filaments such as actin. These myofilaments are organized in sarcomeres. These sarcomeres line up to form myofibrils. These myofibrils come together in muscle fibers, or the muscle cell. Many muscle cells come together to form a fascicle, and these fascicles all come together to form a muscle, or muscle belly. Let's talk about the physiology of muscle contraction. So in the most simplified form, stimulation of a muscle by a nerve signal leads to a cascade of events which cause the thick and thin filaments in the sarcomeres to slide over each other. This leads to contraction of the sarcomere, hence contraction of myofibrils, which in turn lead to shortening of the entire muscle as a whole, causing a contraction. Let's go into this in a little more depth. So the nerve stimulates a muscle through its release of acetylcholine. This acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter, by the way, causes the opening of sodium channels along the cell membrane of a muscle, which generates an action potential. An action potential is really an electrical signal similar to a nerve impulse, except that it's traveling along the muscle this time. This action potential leads to the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which floods the inside of the muscle cell with calcium. Now, sarcoplasmic reticulum is really just the endoplasmic reticulum of a muscle cell. The calcium binds to troponin, which causes a conformational change in the troponin, which allows myosin to bind to nearby actin by exposing myosin binding sites on actin. When the myosin binds the actin, it pulls the actin towards the center of the sarcomere, causing shortening. ATP is used in this process, so this is a process that consumes energy. This process is repeated many times, as long as the nerve stimulus and calcium are present, causing more shortening of the muscle. Once the nerve stimulus stops and calcium is reabsorbed by the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the contractions stop. This process is repeated once there is another nerve signal. Let's talk about naming muscles. Muscles are named in many ways. They can be named based on their shape, based on their size, based on the number of heads slash bellies, based on their position in the body, based on their depth, and based on their action. Now I've placed a couple tables on this slide, and this is a good time if you want to review this slide. You can pause this presentation and review this slide, because I'm not going to go over all the terms on this slide. This slide is a reference slide. However, I can go through some examples. Now, as I said already, muscles can be named based on shape. So let's take, for example, deltoid. Deltoid is a triangular shaped muscle. An example of deltoid is, of course, the deltoid muscle in your body. Muscles can be named based on their action. So let's take, for example, levator. Levator means to raise a body part superiorly. And an example is the levator scapulae. Muscles can be named based on size. So let's look at latissimus. Latissimus means broadest. An example is the latissimus dorsi. Muscles can be named based on the number of heads or bellies. So let's take our favorite muscle, the biceps. Biceps means 2 head. An example is the biceps brachii. Muscles can be named based on position. Abdominis. Abdominis means abdomen. An example is the rectus abdominis, otherwise known as a six-pack muscle. Muscles can be named based on based on depth, such as externus. Obturator externus is an example. Let's finish off by talking about the compartments of the limbs and their actions. When we study the appendicular muscles, knowing which compartment they belong to will tell you what the muscle does. So for example, you got the anterior compartment of the arm, which flexes the shoulder and the elbow. So the main purpose of the anterior compartment is to flex the elbow. The posterior compartment extends the elbow. The anterior compartment of the forearm flexes the wrist and digits. The posterior compartment of the forearm extends the wrist and digits. Now let's go to the thigh. The thigh has anterior, posterior, and medial compartments. The anterior compartment of the thigh extends the knee. The posterior compartment of the thigh flexes the knee. The medial compartment of the thigh adducts the thigh. It's the adductor compartment. Let's look at the compartments of the leg. And the leg, anatomically speaking, is a part of the lower limb that's below the knee. The anterior compartment dorsiflexes the ankle. The dorsiflexes the foot. The posterior compartment plantar flexes the foot. So it points the foot downward. It makes you stand on your tippy toes. The lateral compartment everts the ankle. So it's done. Like this video, subscribe. Thank you, and peace.